So, when can we expect you back?
About that.
Thor, your people need a king.
No, they already have one.
That's funny.
It's time for me to be who I am rather than who I'm supposed to be. But you're a leader. That's who you are.
You know, I'd make a lot of changes around here.
I'm counting on it. Your Majesty.
What will you do?
I'm not sure. For the first time in 1,000 years, I have no path. I do have a ride, though.
Move it or lose it, airbag.
Well, here we are. Tree, good to see you. Well, how's Guardians of the Galaxy back together again? Oh, where to first?
Hey. Just so you know, this is my ship still. I'm in charge.
I know, of course you are. Of course.
So you say of course, but then you touch the map. It makes you think that maybe you didn't realize I was in charge.
Hey, Quail, that's your own
Whale?
insecurities in there, okay? I'm merely trying to be of service and assisting.
Quill.
That's what I said.
We should fight one another for the honor of leadership.
Sounds fair.
Well,
It's not necessary.
it's not.
Okay?
I got some blasters unless you guys want to use knives.
Oh, yes, please. Use knives.
Yeah, knives.
I'm Groot.
Not necessary.
There shall be no knifing one another. Everybody knows who's in charge.
Me. Right?
Yes, you. Of course. Of course. Of course.
Hi everyone, it's Charlie. I've got a lot of requests to do a video for Thor 4 Love and Thunder, so I'll explain what the plot of that movie is. They explained a lot of it during the big Marvel Phase 4 panel, so we'll break it all down. We're doing that Avengers Endgame Blu-ray giveaway. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave your best Thor 4 theory on the video. I just broke this down top 10 style, so starting with number 10, Thor 4 is now going to take place before Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Thor 4 is tail-end Marvel Phase 4 timeline per this schedule, and Guardians is now confirmed Marvel Phase 5, just because James Gunn is going to be busy doing Suicide Squad before he does Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So a very brief Guardians cameo at the beginning of Thor 4, just for the sake of continuity, because Thor is off on their ship as Guardians of the Galaxy again, per that scene at the end of Endgame. But now, Thor may or may not cameo in Guardians 3. The movie's going to pick up a little while after the events of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness for important multiverse reasons I'll explain in a second, but it's hitting theaters November 2021. The last two Thor films have been November films, so that's not a really big surprise. They haven't confirmed whether or not there'll be a Loki cameo from the alternate universe Loki with the Tesseract from Avengers Endgame, if he's going to cross over, because the movie is happening after they do the Loki TV series with that character. If it wasn't clear, the Loki of the Loki TV series that Tom Hiddleston is playing is the Tesseract Loki that we saw escape in Avengers Endgame and create this branch timeline, so he's alternate universe Loki now who's still alive in present day. They didn't say who the main villain is going to be, but don't be surprised if they also use a villain from the multiverse. That's why the Doctor Strange movie is going to be so important, because even though the multiverse already exists, there's a lot of casual audience members that don't really know how it works, and that's what they're getting into during the Doctor Strange multiverse movie. Multiverse is also important for the Mighty Thor plot that they're doing from the comics. So 9, the plot of the movie is based, as you would probably assumed, on Jason Aaron's Mighty Thor run from the past few years. During that story, Jane Foster becomes an alternate version of Thor when comic book Mjolnir from the 616 comic book universe deems her worthy. The reason why the hammer deems her worthy is really important too, because it has a lot to do with what the Marvel Comics were doing with the main version of Thor in the wake of Original Sin and Secret Wars. What they did is when he became unworthy of the hammer, he stopped calling himself Thor and just called himself Odin's son, and they used the Thor name as more of a title that you could pass around instead of just a regular name. Like, my name is Charlie. You don't pass that around unless I have a son and then name him Charlie. Once regular Thor couldn't lift the hammer anymore, the hammer in the comics is alive. It has a sentience, so the hammer knows that Asgard in the Nine Realms always needs a Thor to protect it, to wield it, so when our main version of Thor becomes unworthy, the hammer selects another Thor to replace him. And the replacement just winds up being Jane Foster, who's slowly dying of cancer. They did not say if they're going to do the cancer plot from the comics, like if our Jane Foster Natalie Portman is going to wind up having cancer at the beginning of the movie. But number 8, as you probably suspected, MCU Thor is still worthy of the hammer at the end of Avengers Endgame, so that creates some problems. They'll have to change the comics quite a bit. Taika Waititi is writing the script for the movie and directing, just like he did the script for Thor Ragnarok and directed. And that movie was a mashup of Planet Hulk, Gore the God Butcher, Angela, and comic book Hela. So the actual plot of Thor 4 will be a remix of Mighty Thor with a bunch of other deep cuts from the classic Thor comics. 7, Valkyrie is still going to be King of Asgard during the movie and going forward into Marvel Phase 5. They revealed that she'll also select a queen to join her on the throne. New Asgard is still going to be on Earth in Norway, but because all those Asgardians were unsnapped or blipped back by the Hulk during Endgame, now there are double what there were before. Still a fraction of their former population before Hela and Thanos then killed a bunch of them the old-fashioned way, but the actual job of being King of Asgard will just be a much bigger deal with that many more subjects to handle. 6, as you probably assume, Natalie Portman is returning as Jane Foster as a main character during the movie. Even though she was briefly in Avengers Endgame, this is actually kind of funny, her cameo, the Reality Stone scene, was actually taken from a deleted scene in Thor Ragnarok that they just added Rocket to. Natalie Portman never set foot on the set of Avengers Endgame and never really had anything to do with it. After Thor the Dark World came out, she did pretty much everything she could to get people to forget that she was ever in a Thor movie. During Avengers Age of Ultron, they sort of relegated her off into the distance. Thor's like, oh, she's off studying science and Asgardian technology somewhere safe. Fun fact too, Thor the Dark World heralded as one of the weakest MCU scripts by the fandom. The same people who wrote Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame wrote Thor the Dark World, Marcus and McFeely. They also wrote all the Captain America movies, so part of the reason why they used all that Thor the Dark World stuff during Avengers Endgame was to 1, kind of make fun of themselves for their own bad script, but 2, to retcon a lot of those things with new scenes like all the Frigga stuff to make it seem like a much better movie in retrospect. Just a really funny side detail. But 5, in order for Thor 4 to make Jane Foster become an alternate version of Thor, Taika Waititi said during the movie she will be referred to as Mighty Thor when she's in Thor form. She'll have to wield a version of Mjolnir. She has to be deemed worthy by a version of the hammer, and that only works when you have Mjolnir. Stormbreaker, which regular Thor still has right now, doesn't have a worthiness enchantment on it, so anyone who's physically strong enough can pick it up. That's why Thanos is able to lift Stormbreaker and use it against Thor during their big fight. But here's the thing, at the end of Avengers Endgame, Captain America casually takes Mjolnir back to Thor the Dark World, so they don't have a version of Mjolnir in present day because Hela blew that one up at the beginning of Thor Ragnarok. The whole plot of Thor 4 rests on them having a version of that hammer, so for early speculation, best theory is that because the movie is happening at the tail end of Marvel Phase 4 after the events of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, that they'll use the multiverse to get themselves another version of Mjolnir for Jane Foster to wield. Remember, multiverse is also important for involving the alternate version of Loki with the Tesseract, because wouldn't it be weird to have a Thor film with no Loki cameo? They did the exact same thing with Thor's hammer after Secret Wars. You have hundreds of different versions of Thor in Secret Wars running around. When they fixed everything, Ultimate Thor's hammer, which coincidentally looks just like MCU Stormbreaker, winds up in the 616 universe, waiting till another person came along to pick it up and become another alternate version of Thor. That version of Thor that wielded Ultimate Thor's hammer was called the War Thor. He was different from the Jane Foster Mighty Thor, but it's the multiverse hammer explainer that matters. 3, that way you can have 2 versions of Thor in the same movie. One, our regular Thor with Stormbreaker, and a Mighty Thor, Jane Foster, without having to make normal Thor unworthy again, and without having to kill him at the beginning of the movie. Your next big question, I know, is if Thor's alive and he still has Stormbreaker, then why did they need another version of Thor? What's the whole point of this? Well, the reason is probably because Asgard must always have a Thor, and at the beginning of Avengers Endgame, our main version of Thor says he's setting off to intergalactic adventures across the universe, so he won't be around to help them out. But you say, Charlie, Stormbreaker can open Bifrost bridges, teleporting Thor instantly across the universe anywhere he wants to go. Why is availability a problem if Thor can go anywhere in an instant? So number 2, next early speculation, early theory, is that he'll wind up giving Stormbreaker to Beta Ray Bill after they introduce the character, because Beta Ray Bill's hammer in the comics is called Stormbreaker. Beta Ray Bill, the character, was supposed to debut during Thor Ragnarok. They shot footage with him for the Contest of Champions, the big arena fights, then decided at the last minute to cut him from the film and just save him for a proper story in a future Thor film when he could be a bigger character. Thor 4 is the perfect opportunity to introduce him, and before they'd confirmed when the movie was actually supposed to happen, I'd assume naturally that they'd introduce him during Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, because he's such a weird character. He's also perfect for the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. He even joined a version of the Guardians team recently in the comics, so that's how you take away main Thor's instant transmission ability. But number 1, probably biggest question you have, I know, is what's going to happen to main Thor and Jane Foster Mighty Thor after Thor 4? Most likely scenario is that depending on what kind of contract Natalie Portman signs, she'll continue to cameo as Jane Foster Thor every once in a while in future MCU movies in the background, like a couple scenes here and there in the next Avengers movie, but not really as a huge main character like Chris Hemsworth's Thor has been. Main Thor will either probably wind up sacrificing himself like he did in the comics during War of the Realms as a way to sort of ice him for a little while till the next Avengers movie, or continue off exploring the universe into Marvel Phase 5. Like, look at what I found in this corner of the universe. There's a big creature calling itself Galactus.
So, when can we expect you back?
We're not